Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. This is the State Water Board's Water Quality Fee Stakeholder Meeting. My name is David Ceccarelli. I'm here with Glenn Osterhage. Glenn and I are both from the fee section here at the Water Board. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. In case of emergency, we're asked to go out the doors, down the stairs, and meet at the park across the street. There are restrooms outside the door to the left, and there's also a cafeteria on the first floor. Hopefully everyone's signed in. If you haven't, please sign in before you leave today. There are also agendas back of the room. We do have a couple of program staff here in the room, also from Water Quality. Again, please, if you haven't, please go ahead and take an agenda. This meeting is going to be webcast, so for those that are on the web, you can ask questions through our website, and it's the fee branch at waterboards.ca.gov is the email address to direct the questions. Those in the room that are going to be asking questions, there will be mics that'll be going around, so please wait for a mic, and then that way those in the room here and also those on the web also hear it. For the agenda, we'll go through our budget and our cost drivers. We'll go through, talk about some of the recent program increases, the fee increases over the last year. We'll also talk about potential fee changes moving into fiscal year 1920. We'll talk about some of our stakeholder outreach and activities that we've done over the last year. And then we'll give some program updates. So for this meeting, this is our first take at looking at the budgetary numbers based on the governor's proposed budget. So this is the first look at the waste discharge permit fund based on the numbers that are coming out of the January 10th budget. We host these meetings based on the release of the budget. So our next meeting will be in June based on the May revise, and then we'll have a meeting after the Budget Act is signed in August. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll have Glenn start with agenda item number 2.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, yeah, we have attachment 1 up on the screen. So this is our standard form we've had for a few number of years, going over each of our programs within the WDPF. The biggest highlights, without going through all the columns, and we'll take questions for anyone who has them, is looking at column C, the BCP changes. There are a couple of BCPs in the January proposed budget. We also had one BCP authorized last year for space optimization here in this building that is no longer being funded for this fiscal year. So the net effect is about $1.2 million is being added to our expenditures. The 2 BCPs, I'm going to call them more targeted. It's not going to be spread out. Some of the times we get a BCP in, we spread it across all fee payers. These 2 particular ones, we're going to look to target certain permit holders for those. So down in the middle where it says BCP changes, like I said, the space optimization one is going away from last year. The next one down is wildfire prevention and recovery. It's SB 901. This one is going to be targeted to utilities for work. If we have any specific questions on the BCPs, we have program staff here who can give more information on those. We do have links to the finance database with all the detailed information on those BCPs. So again, that one's not going to be targeted to all fee payers, more just towards the utility operators. We're going to be working to determine what that fee is going to be associated with that BCP. The second one is a smaller one, $500,000 for sewer service provision for disadvantaged communities. It's SB 1215. We're looking at having these targeted to POTWs to pick up that charges. Again, it's not going to be spread out to all the other programs. Other than that, if we move over on our chart, going over to column D is every year we have to adjust our numbers from the prior year when we set our fees. Most programs generally are going to have increases for staff costs or program costs. That's the salary, the pro rata, retirement, all those wonderful activities. Some programs, in this case, land disposal is the big one. There are adjustments done in our budget office and our accounting offices for some expenditures. So they get a reduction this year. Other than that, as we move across the chart, the biggest one to look at is column I. That's what our forecasted fee increase would be just within the budget and revenue projections. It does not take into consideration our fund reserve. It's just within these sets of numbers. Taking into consideration the BCPs primarily going to the WDR program and a smaller portion going to NPDES potentially, we do show a significant increase for the WDR, but again, most of that can be picked up by the utility companies. Most programs are going to be in the 10 to 15% range, with the exception of land disposal and stormwater. Those programs both have projected revenue slightly in excess of expenditures. So those programs are, I don't forecast any changes for fees for those. I'm going to have switched over to attachment number 2 real quick. This is a chart we started showing last year, for the last couple of years, showing what our projected fee increases were needed for each of the programs and what we actually adopted in those years. So going back to fiscal year 16-17, with the exception of the water quality certification program, we needed small fee increases, but obviously they were so small, we didn't adopt fees. Those percentages, if you stay on the top line for WDR, 3%, it really carries over to the next year, so it's kind of deferred. In fiscal year 17-18, most programs were in the 10% range. The exception was the agricultural lands program, because they had a specific BCP for that program, and water quality certification, where we did do fee increases for those programs. But again, like WDR is the example, that 10%, we didn't raise fees for 17-18, we deferred it to the next year. So last year we came through and most programs needed that, in this case looks like 12 to 20% fee increases. We suggested to our board we only raised the fees about half of what was required. We had a little fund reserve that could offset some of that. So again, that roughly half of it was deferred to the next year. So now we get into our fiscal year 19-20 column. We do now show the prior year deferral. Again, if you look at WDR, we deferred about 9% from last year to this year. The additional need is at 14%. Again, that's a little higher because of the BCP that will be targeted to certain fee payers. But most programs are going to need roughly 10 to 20% fee increase. Majority of that is a carryover from last year. The 3 to 6% is the normal program costs for those. So it kind of gives a history of where we've been the last few years with fees. Based off of fund reserves and our balances, we've been able to, I'm going to change the term, kick the bucket down the road. Last year, we raised it about half. And this year, again, not knowing what our fund reserve is going to be yet, we're looking around 10 to 20% fee increases for most programs. Any questions on either of those 2 attachments? Got to wait for a microphone to come around. 2 hands. Did I get a third hand?
Tim Johnson, California Rice Commission. Question on column F. I know pretty significant difference between what your budget was for the ag lands, irrigated lands program compared to what you're projecting for revenue for this year. Can you expand upon that, why that is?
Yeah, most of that is because last year we didn't raise fees the full amount that was required. So again, I'm going on to attachment 2. Ag program needed roughly about a 12% fee increase. We only raised it about 6%. So if we had done the full 12%, our revenue forecast would be higher. We just didn't raise the fees completely. Part of that also entails forecasting additional acres coming on that haven't been adopted. I forget the region. I want to say it's region 7 down south that has a coalition that's in the process of starting up. And when we're going to start seeing the revenue come from those growers down south. And then obviously any other regions that may have additional acres coming on board. Last year, I don't have the number in front of me. I think I forecasted an extra 600,000 in enrolled acres coming in last year. I don't think we got that enrollment last year. So our revenue is a little lower than we had targeted from last year as well.
When I look at column E, then, that's really, from a math perspective, the amount of dollars that would be allocated to each of the programs. That is not necessarily the budget that you adopt.
Well, when you say the budget we adopt, that's not the fee we adopt. That's
fee you adopt.
Correct. We adopted fees less than our budgeted number.
Okay, thank you.
a couple comments that may be helpful and a question. To follow up on what Tim said on behalf of the wine grape growers, if you could next time or maybe send us what you projected for the acreage increase in the current fiscal year, what was hit, and then what next year's is, because that determines the per acre levy, and it would be just useful to know so we have a bit of context. The second is on WDRs, the 23.1% increase, most of it's going to utilities, got it. But what you might do soon is net out the increase after what the utilities pay, so the rest of us can figure out what the true hit is, because if it's not 23%,
Yeah.
what is it?
No, I agree. I might hopefully, if we don't do it far before the June meeting, at the latest would be at the June meeting, we'll have more detail as to what we think the non-utility fee increase would be. It's going to be roughly 10% probably. I'm just as a
That's good
ballpark,
to know.
and then the rest of it would go towards the utilities. But we'll have more detail, if not before June, then at least by the June meeting.
I go to all the budget hearings, so I appreciate, Karen, the fluidity of the situation, because the legislature hasn't made up its mind yet, nor has the corner office. Lastly, the BCP changes, I'm sorry, not that, it's staff cost adjustments. Under WDR, it appears somebody missed the boat by $1.5 million. That's a huge miss. What happened? Can somebody
Part of that is because of the new BCPs that come into play, the budget for that particular program is increasing. So it's picking up additional costs for, if you're familiar with our redirected programs, so it's picking up additional costs towards the basin planning TMDL, swamp and gamma enforcement. So it's picking up higher charges there. Yes, depending on the budget numbers we get, I have to kind of prorate out the budget numbers. I don't get the actuals from our budget group until after the fact. So my proration formula is going to be a little different than what we get from actual. So yeah, we may have overstated, in this case would be land disposal, and maybe understated WDR just a little bit. That's just the way things go when you forecast in advance.
And one comment, I guess mainly for the program folks. Some of my clients are concerned about a disparate growth in enforcement, and with the new policy under development, it would be good to know out of swamp, gamma, all the other programmatic costs, if we expect to see in coming years a significant increase in enforcement costs at some point, say by June, maybe.
Have anything you want to see on that? I don't know if anyone on the program side, the numbers I see, there was no increased cost for the enforcement that goes towards the fee payers. I know on their cannabis program, they have a large enforcement operation going on now. But as far as all the programs, I don't think the enforcement P-wise have been increased. If there's additional activity, it's probably being funded by other sources.
That's lovely. Thank you.
I think we got a question.
Sharon Green from the Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles wants to know, are fund reserves built into the table and at what level?
Right now, they are not. Those of you who are familiar with the statewide FisCal financial accounting database, we rolled into it last summer. Our accounting office is still struggling. We have yet to get a current year report of any expenditures. So I don't even know what our fund reserve is planned out right now. So this does not. So these numbers here, I call this in a vacuum. It's only looking at our budgeted expenditures, our forecasted revenue within this set of data. Hopefully by June, we'll have an idea of what our fund reserve is going to be. If it's going to be higher than our target last year was about 4%. So if we're in the 6 or 7% range, we may be able to recommend to our board to defer some costs. If our fund reserve comes below and starts getting down to the 2% range, then we may have to compensate for that as well. But no, for Sharon, these numbers do not account anything for fund reserve at the moment. Any other questions out there? Okay. We're going to move on to agenda item number 4, potential fee increases. This is just to give an idea for certain programs. Some of the conversations we have is things that may change. The stormwater item 4A for special districts. We do have some port districts that are not, they don't have any oversight by the county or the municipality in their area. Right now, they're not paying fees, so we're working with our Office of Chief Counsel to change some language to make sure that certain areas that are not currently paying fees, that don't have oversight in their area for the stormwater activity, that they are assessed a fee. So it's really targeted to certain districts right now. The NPDES program for desalinization. Again, I'm not a program person, but I'm told that the desalinization work is very staff intensive up front. It takes years to get a permit authorized or certified. A lot of costs associated with this. So again, we're working with program and our legal staff to see if there's a fee structure for that type of work to make sure that those entities are paying for the staff work associated with them. So again, it's targeted to a handful of permits that are out there. And the next one I'm going to see if David wants to take, but it's the cannabis. A lot of work. The indoor grows, they're familiar with the program. They basically paid a one-time application fee, and then they don't have to pay for a fee for 5 years. That was based off of staff time. It anticipated not having a lot of work associated with the indoor grows. It turns out that staff is spending a lot of time with that activity, almost the same amount of time as it takes for an outdoor grow. So I don't know if David, you want to address more on that one.
Yes, and just as Glenn mentioned on all three of these items, when we do look at doing potential fee changes, we look at staff time and what the cost is, and the level of effort or work that's taken to help regulate and permit these type of activities. And many of these, and a couple of these, of course, are new, but a lot of our fee schedules that we look at, some of the fees have been set for many of years, but they get, of course, our individual staff time for those activities go up. And so specifically to that cannabis indoor grows, again, the program's been with us for a couple of years, so we're just in this we're in this process of evaluating the program and determining what the workload is. One, I will say the number of indoor grows throughout the state were more than what we anticipated. And as Glenn mentioned, right now they're paying a minimal $600 fee, and we're noticing that staff's going out, spending a lot of time on those, evaluating them. And so we're working with regional board staff. We've met with some stakeholders on this, an individual group, to just kind of have a discussion that we are looking into this and moving forward. So we will have a proposal before June, and something that we do want to look at adopting at our September board meeting. We're also looking at doing an adjustment on the overall fee schedules for cannabis also. So for those that are kind of aware of the program, there are currently still 2 fee schedules for the cannabis program that are in play as of right now, and one ends on June 30th of 2019, which is the regional board orders. They had a specific fee schedule, and then the statewide order had a specific fee schedule. And those in the regional orders are required to transition into the statewide order and look at paying the statewide fee schedule. So we're evaluating, again, that statewide fee schedule compared to what the regional board fee schedules were, because those were different. And some of the categories, of course, on the regional board orders were higher than the statewide orders. So we're definitely going to look at trying to mirror those and get those put into play. And again, as we're working with program staff, we're just determining that a lot more staff time are being spent on indoor and outdoor grows. And as on our cost drivers and our evaluations, we're definitely not hitting our targets on the cannabis revenue compared to expenditures. So we're definitely trying to help bring that up and match our revenue and expenditures.
Yeah, before we have Tim's question here, we have attachment 1 back on the screen. We put cannabis down below all the other programs to kind of isolate them. If you go to column M as in Mary, you'll see that they basically, revenue is going to be about half of the projected expenditure. So as David was saying, we're reevaluating that program and the statewide order. The number of enrollments are a lot lower than what was projected. A lot of the enrollments are coming in at the lower fee tier instead of coming in at the mid or the higher tier. So that program is being reevaluated. Like David said, we'll have more information hopefully at the June meeting. So I know Tim had a question here.
First, I appreciate the evaluation of the cannabis program. I think that it's far different than just about everybody thought it might end up. And so it's great that you're reevaluating it. Just let me ask a question that I think I know the answer to. Say if we continue to not get it right, you continue to have a pretty significant shortfall over projected revenue, at least anyway, for that program. How do you make up the balance?
We got a third? No, sorry.
Well, we're definitely looking at doing fee increases, which are going to help generate the revenue to cover our program cost. So that is one option. The other option internally, we are looking at potentially getting some. So there's the cannabis tax fund that helps supports the water rights fund right now, and so internally we are having some conversations outside, of course, with the Department of Finance on how we can help fund this program to get it started until our enrollments truly come in. And what I mean by that is if you were to go back and you were to look at other state agencies when this program was all getting started, and I say like Food and Ag and Cal Cannabis and Fish and Wildlife, they all had BCPs at the same time we had our BCP in. Our BCP, though, was more heavy on fees coming in right away and lower on special funds. Reverse was the other side where the other agencies went special funds and then fees down the line. And so we did overshoot on what we thought our enrollment was going to be, and I think the whole state did. And then, of course, a lot of the issues that are taking place, I know program staff is here to have some discussions if needed, but the workload's still there. There's a lot of workload. There's a lot of enforcement that's taking place. There's still a lot working on the outreach. A lot of time was spent on putting together the policies and the orders. But our goal is not for any other fee payers to help subsidize this program, and that's why we've carved it out. And again, we're internally working on how to fund it. But I would say right now that looking at the fee schedules, we're probably looking at doubling their fees. But on a standpoint of comparing it to like a WDR fee, it's still about in the same line, and it's still about the same level of effort of work. So $600 is basically about 3 hours of staff time. And we definitely know that a lot more time is being spent on that. So we're definitely, we're analyzing the numbers, the evaluation of enrollments that are coming in. They're steadily coming in. We do have a few challenges because we just don't know how many of the regional, well, we have some estimates, but of course we have high numbers on the regional board orders. We just don't know how many of those are going to transition in. We may not see the full amount of those transitioning in right away. So that's another thing which we're evaluating. Staff's been doing a great job getting the outreach out and with the enforcement actions that are pulling the numbers in. But we are definitely at this point, I mean, our first option is basically increasing fees and going there and getting our numbers up. But again, our goal is not to spread these costs out to any other fee payers.
Thank you. Just a comment and then a follow-up question. I fully support that position. It would be very distressing, I think, for those of us in production agriculture, as I imagine the other fee payers, to have to shoulder this cost. I mean, if State of California wanted this and they decided they did, and we just need to find a way to make it work. Understand they'll also complain about the cost of fees, maybe even louder than production agriculture, so they're not going to like that. So if you're going to adopt this fee along with your regular fee adoption schedule, so for those of us who've got a comment relative to allocation of costs and fees for other programs would have an opportunity to speak to it at that time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We'll go ahead and if this still plays out and we're going to, by early September, staff will put their proposal out as a staff report, and then you'll have an opportunity to comment.
Thank you.
We'll most likely have, I call breakout cannabis stakeholder meetings as well. Yeah. And the other part that, again, because of our accounting system and the fiscal, looking at the expenditures, the program isn't fully staffed, so we're hoping that they won't meet their expenditure number. They'll actually spend a little bit less, but we always show the maximum allowed expenditure, but we'll hopefully kind of mirror those together. But yeah, if there's a shortfall, we're going to look for other sources to help cover that. Questions online? So I think that covered agenda item number 4. A couple of the other programs I'm going to cover when we get down to number 5. So we're going to jump down to number 5, just kind of give an overview of some of the, I call the breakout stakeholder activity we've been having over the past year. The first one I'm going to start with is the confined animal facilities program. We've been going out to various parts of the state in January. Trying to remember the order we went to. Went down to Tulare. Late January, we're at Petaluma. Last month in February, we went to Modesto. Went down to south of Riverside in Paris. And then last week, we were up in Eureka, meeting potentially with the dairy operators. Down south, they have some feedlots. We've been discussing with that program different ways of assessing fees. A couple of years ago, we looked at what's called animal equivalent units, AEU. After the discussions with some of the core stakeholders, we moved away from that one. This year, we're looking at a structure that was, I'm going to generally call it a surcharge for dairy operations that had support stock above and beyond a normal standardized or industry standard. The emphasis for that was there are some facilities not currently paying a fee off of our fee schedule that have a couple of thousand heifers on their lot. So we're looking at the inequity of that and trying to figure out a way of making sure we look at that. So we kind of floated out a concept of a surcharge a couple of months ago. Over the last meetings I've had, we're sort of walking away from that one. I see JP here. I haven't talked to you in a little while. But we're looking at potentially striking some language in our current fee structure. Those who are familiar with it might just be JP here. On the feedlot side of our fee structure, it says not at a dairy. We're going to look to strike out that language. So a dairy or permitted facility as a dairy that basically has no milking cows or one or two, but have a couple of thousand heifers on their lot, we can then charge them the feedlot amount on our fee schedule. Wouldn't be the amount that they would pay on the dairy side, but at least it gets them starting to pay an annual fee. So we're looking at that. We are going to have a meeting on April 11th. April 11th is kind of a readout meeting. It's going to be a webcast here in Sacramento. We'll provide some of the feedback we received from some of these remote meetings. Again, it's more specific just to the confined animal program, but we've been working with them to kind of look at their structure. Probably the biggest takeaway we're going to look at, and it won't be done this year, is to look at the fee charge on the feedlot side in comparison to the fee charged on the dairy side. They're two separate fee structures. At least in our Central Valley, our Region 5, they recently adopted a bovine order. They're expecting more operations to be permitted. It might be a good time to look at the equity between those two sides. The operations of doing a feedlot is very different than a dairy side. So they may not be comparable to each other, but can we make sure that they're somewhat balanced to each other? So it's something we're going to look at going forward. So I know, JP, do you have any specific questions related to the confined animal program on that topic versus general fees? No, at the time? Okay. The other one we've been working on, and I know we have a couple of folks here on the agricultural land side. We've been meeting with that community on and off. Our program staff, I don't see them specifically here today for that program, although Scott's here. They are working to look at potential new structures for the ag program. Right now, it's a very simplistic per acre fee charge. I believe, I know, Tim, I think you had reached out to program staff. You've been talking externally from the water board with some of the other stakeholders. I think you may have some other options you're going to talk with program on. So again, we're reaching out to the community, a potential way of looking at maybe a discount here or looking what staff does. That program is very unique because they have a lot of approved groups or coalitions that do a lot of work on behalf of the water boards. So again, we're evaluating that. We've been in discussions for a couple of years. We've looked at different things. We've never been able to move forward with any change. So again, we're continuing to work with that group to see if there's a different way of, I don't want to say incentivizing, but changing the structure to make it, I don't know if I want to use the right words, more equitable for certain groups versus others. So it's something that may happen this year, depending on which route our program and the community goes with, or it could be something we continue discussions on for the next year. So I don't know, Scott, if you had anything specific you wanted to say, or if we had any comments from the interested parties on the ag, on anything specific to your program? No? Okay, so I'll summarize since you didn't have the microphone for those on the air. So the ag community is working with program staff, as I indicated before. to see if they can move forward with a proposal that we could take to our board. So they're in discussions. I don't have some of that detail because on the program side, but any information that eventually feeds back to us, if we have something by the June meeting, we'll let you guys know what that is. If it's the August meeting, we'll go there. Obviously, if we have something to go to our board, there'll be notice for that as well. Any other questions on those? And that covers our primary conversations. We did have a topic here for our program staff. I don't know if Karen, if you guys wanted to specifically say anything, or if you guys had any questions or comments. This is kind of the open forum. Any specific questions? This is a very generic meeting because we're just getting our first look at the January proposed budget. We don't have specifics as to any types of the actual fee changes yet. Hopefully by the time we get to June, we're going to have a little more specifics, and obviously when we get the adopted budget, we'll know exactly what we're going to hone in on. I see you have the microphone there, Bob.
One quick question on behalf of a cul-de-sac stakeholder. The sump fee is what next year proposed? Unchanged?
Right now it would be unchanged. So if we increase fees like we did last year for the WDRs, that surcharge specific to the sumps would stay the same as it is. I haven't yet reached out to program staff to verify their staffing efforts yet, but at worst it won't go up.
One question I might suggest, with all due respect, when you talk to the Central Valley folks, ask them if the number of ponds is going down, because theoretically that's the whole point of that program, is to reduce them, and then also concomitantly reduce the staff work. And with the staffing up that the permit has paid for, at some point there should be a anyway, thank you.
Top of my head, was it 6 PYs were authorized for that?
I think so,
Okay.
6 or 7, and okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
so we'll reach out to program staff and verify what they're doing with that program. I don't forecast increasing that surcharge. At some point, we've talked in the past, it should be tailored down depending on what the workload is actually for that program.
At some point it gets de minimis, but
Yeah.
anyway, thank you.
Any other questions? That covers everything I wanted to go over. Dave, is there anything else you want to add?
That's all I have. Let's get any other questions. Program?
Want to come up? Okay. I will mention while they're coming up here, for the ag community, we haven't published it yet, but we're going to have a meeting May 22nd, specific to the ag program as follow-up conversations. I know our regional board was doing their conversations within themselves, and then they were going to communicate with the stakeholder community, but our next fee coordinated meeting with that will be May 22nd.
Thanks. This is Karen Mogus, Deputy Director, Division of Water Quality. I had a couple of comments I wanted to make. First off, whenever we talk about fees, everybody wonders what we're spending those fees on, and I wanted to remind you all that we're in the, I think, 11th or 12th year of our agency performance report, and we have targets and measures that we report out on all of our regulatory programs, and so I encourage you to take a look at those and see what we report out on, and get a feel for, you know, the transparency that we have in that report. So that's one thing. And then the other that I wanted to mention is that oftentimes, well, this has been a conversation with respect to the cost of compliance with our water quality programs and improving efficiency of our staff work. And I wanted to mention that we're always looking at ways to improve our efficiency through, say, statewide orders that, like the cannabis order or like the winery order that we're working on, to have consistency across the state, but also relieve some of the workload of the regional boards with respect to permitting. So that's one way. Another way is to look at our IT systems and the way that we manage data, and we ask for information from our stakeholders and analyze it for our program activities. One in particular, and I don't know that I have any 401 cert stakeholders in the room, but we're getting close to launching our data system for the 401 program that will streamline our application and permitting process for that program. We're always looking for opportunities to streamline. with respect to our technology as well. So just wanted to point those two items out as context for the discussion of fees. And with that, I'll hand it over to Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott Couch with the Division of Water Quality, and I just wanted to thank the stakeholders, you guys that do show up and give us comments, and some of you we've been working with on various issues. But I did have a reminder for the cannabis group. I don't see any here, but on the off chance there are some that are listening online, I had a reminder that there is another meeting. The water rights fee stakeholder meeting is Monday. I'm not sure what time, 10.
Yeah, exactly. The water rights fee stakeholder meeting will be Monday, the 18th, from 1 to 3, and it'll be here in the Sierra room.
So all of the folks that are signed up with us for the water quality permit have to deal with the water quality fees that we talked about here, but some of those people will also be diverting water and may be subject to the water rights permit. So just a reminder about that.
So last time, any further questions? Okay. Couple here.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry, I missed the first 10 minutes of this. Did you talk about columns N and O already?
Not specifically.
What does that mean?
Okay, so this was actually, I think, Bob is sitting back there, asked for this, that we add in, right now, I think I call it the budget years, so 1 or 2 years out, what potential fee increases could be. At this stage, since we're not looking at our fund reserve to see if they're going to defer anything, I just threw out the 4%. So if we raise fees, so since JP asked this, if we raise confined animals up the 11% that's currently forecasted, next year you would generally expect about a 4% because that's the staff costs that go up each year. If there's any deferral, so we have a fund reserve, and say we defer, let's make a number up, 5% gets deferred to another year, then we have 9% next year, and how do we play with those numbers? So if there's any deferrals or there's any agreement to spread increases over 2 or 3 years potentially, I know water rights did this for a number of years, we can show it here if we have something that we're planning to do beyond a 1-year window. So I didn't address it here because we don't have any fund reserve numbers to really impact this or decision that we may defer stuff to next year.
Thank you. Debbie Webster with the Central Valley Clean Water Association. Earlier you were talking about some of the new fees or the BCP changes for wildfire, and you said utilities. Can you describe what you mean by utilities?
But I have Karen here.
So part of the SB 901 requirements are to increase, are for public utilities to improve their vegetation management in their utility corridors. So these are PG&E, Southern California Edison, those utilities that have power line corridors that they need to maintain in fire-prone areas. And so those are the utilities we're talking about, not wastewater treatment plants.
Okay, and then my second question is as you were talking about the cannabis program, I know that in order to develop the program, reserves from kind of all the water quality fee payers went to go support that program. Actually, I have 2 cannabis questions. And I know part of what you're proposing is to, bring back some reserves. To the extent that it's, how much will, in the future, the cannabis program or any other new program go to pay towards the cost that it took to develop rather than spreading that cost over existing fee payers?
Well, for one, let me just start by, again, we're specifically, the cannabis program and the cannabis revenue is our position is planned where that money is going to pay for the program itself. To talk a little bit about the startup, though, the way the positions came in the BCPs and the way the order was adopted for regions 1 and 5, For the first actually year and a half and almost 2 years, revenue exceeded our expenditures because we got a lot of applications in, specifically up in the North Coast, the Humboldt area. So we definitely got a lot of revenue that came in. So revenue exceeded our expenditures. And then because by the time our budget change proposal was put in and our positions were allocated in a 2-year span where they came in at, 1 year in 17, 18, and then the remaining came in this current year, 18, 19. Now we're at a point, though, where we're fully staffed. Our expenditures are exceeding where our revenue is. So a lot of that revenue that came in those first couple of years, we earmarked it, did go into the reserve, but we earmarked it for the cannabis program. Now we're evaluating it as we're moving forward, and we're trying to develop a fee schedule and or looking at other options, like perhaps looking at the special funds like the cannabis tax funds to help offset this until we fully get the program ramped up where we get enough enrollments in that it'll fully support the program. Based on the cannabis program and their share of the redirected cost, I believe we evaluate the program as about an $18 million, $19 million program. So we're trying to, that's our targeted number, to try to generate enough in funding to support that program.
I think my question actually goes back before that. It was pre-permit. So there was about 2 or 3 years, and it was a significant amount, and you were, during those fee stakeholder meetings, we were told that it was used to, we were using the reserves in order to develop that program. And so it goes towards that, and then you said something else earlier where that some of that water is going, or some of that money is going to the water supply. Excuse the word, but on the water supply revenue. So I'm just wondering, is that those amount of reserves, because there was significant increase in cost during that time to pay that was spread out upon all permitted holders on the water quality side. How, you know, are they ever going to have to pay for the cost to just develop the program initially, not the start of when they started collecting fees?
Let me jump in here first, and then David can take probably the second part. So as far as paying for the program, no other program contributed any revenue towards the cannabis startup. I can state that right now. So if you were told that, then it was just a misstatement or something got crossed in the wires. But this program has always had just enough revenue coming in to cover the actual expenditures that went out. I think initially the program did have some general fund support for a few years, so the startup was paid by other funding sources. And then 17, 18 is when some of the staffing got put into the WDPF, and that's what our fees were covering for. So actually, there's a little bit of extra money came in through cannabis and expenditures. That actually went to our fund reserve for all the programs. It wasn't significant, but it has not been a negative. This will be the first year right now we're forecasting a major negative. We anticipate raising fees significantly to make sure it always stays as a positive number, not a negative. I don't know if that answered your question. But I can say right now, no other fee payer paid towards cannabis.
It did, but I'll have to look back because it was actually you guys that said that. So.
Okay. If I did that, then I retract my statement, obviously.
Any further questions? Okay, and as, again, I know there's a lot of numbers here on the spreadsheets, and as you go back and you start taking a look at them, if you have any questions, please contact Glenn or I. We'll be more than happy to meet with you individually. With that said, our next meeting is in June.
Yeah, so the next general fee stakeholder meeting for the WDPF will be in June. Like I say, we do have a confined animal webcast in April. We do have an ag lands stakeholder meeting in May, but our next general meeting will be in June based off the May revised, and then followed up with a meeting in August, assuming we're going to have an adopted budget this summer.
And just to remind everyone, we do have a water rights fee stakeholder meeting this Monday, and we'll again be talking about the Water Rights Fund and some potential changes we're making in that program, and we'll also have a discussion, as Scott said, on the cannabis side for the water rights program. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you.